Hey, everybody. It is Monday, June 30th. It's the last day of June, Jill. We got to make it count. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Nunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, officially, we will be closer to 2026 tomorrow than 2024.
I am not emotionally prepared to handle that news, but thank you.
like prepare those replies. Like, we should kick this to next year. Let's reconnect on this next year. We're not quite there yet, but we're closer to those than last year's.
Although I usually do an end of the year holiday card with like a wrap of pictures of my family and send it to a bunch of people. Mm-hmm. And we did not do one at the end of 2024. And believe it or not, I actually have started to think about some of the pictures I'm going to use because we're definitely going to do one this year. Yeah. So I guess maybe I am ready. I'm ready for the holidays already.
Ready for
and
fall.
I'm not talking July 4th. Well,
let's put up the Christmas decorations.
My daughter said to me on Sunday, we were trying to figure out what we were going to do. And she's like, let's go back to school shopping. I'm like, you have camp tomorrow. What are you talking about? Back to school shopping.
They have effectively targeted her on YouTube. Like the ads have gotten to her. Like, time for back to school. Now, for the more mind-blowing statistic, as of midday tomorrow, Jill, we will be closer to the year 2050 than the year 2000, because we'll be halfway through the year 2025, more than halfway through 2025. So there's another, that's slightly a larger issue.
What are you trying to do here to us? Just absolutely kill us.
What I'm trying to do is give you interesting things to talk about with your friends and family and be like, oh, I didn't know that. Where did you hear that? Oh, the Mo News podcast. So this is really just a marketing ploy in addition to making you feel really old.
Well, the good news, or maybe the bad news, is that I already feel old. So we have that out of the way.
So, Moshe, this was unnecessary. This was unnecessary. Save it for your other podcast.
All right, so stop me if you've heard this before. It was another very big weekend of news. So shall we get to the headlines?
Let's do it. It's a 4-day week, so we're jamming in a lot these next 4 days.
All right, so the Senate pulled an all-nighter last night as it engages in the final debate over what President Trump calls the big, beautiful bill, tax cuts and new spending priorities. After the bill cleared a major legislative hurdle this weekend, several Republicans in the Senate have major issues with the bill, set to add more than $3 trillion to the nation's debt. We'll tell you how the White House is trying to get Republicans in line. Their goal, get that bill passed by July 4th. That is this Friday. A number of key rulings by the Supreme Court last Friday, including one regarding ending birthright citizenship, and it sets up a critical month for the future of the issue in America. What comes next?
Yes, we'll give you the highlights from the season finale of the Supremes.
Some new numbers out on immigration arrests, where they are increasing the quickest. Overseas, Iran cracking down, executing 6 people for allegedly collaborating with Israel. Why analysts say this period after the 12-day war could be the most dangerous for average Iranians. The president of the University of Virginia has resigned amid a Justice Department investigation into the school's DEI practices. Could this be Trump's most significant victory in his fight with higher education? To some health news, we're eating less fast food. That's according to some new data from the CDC. How the trend relates to HHS Secretary RFK Jr.'s campaign against processed food.
Are we actually eating less fast food, or are we just saying that because we're scared of RFK now, Jill?
And Wimbledon kicks off today, and 2 of tennis's biggest stars took to TikTok to bury the hatchet just in time. And they picked a 90s song, Moshe, to do a dance to. I'm into it.
Jill, made before both of these Gen Zers were born.
And Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, on this day in history, E equaled MC squared. Can you tell the people what that means?
I have one name, Albert Einstein.
You're on the road to explaining it. We'll break it down to you.
That's all I could do, though. That's as far as I go.
In layman's terms at the end of this podcast.
I'm going to pass the torch over to you after Albert Einstein. That's as far as I go.
Moshe, known for his understanding of the theory of relativity. Well, I tried my best for you folks.
All right, Senate Republican leaders hoping to pass the multi-trillion-dollar domestic tax cut and spending package that President Trump has dubbed the Big Beautiful Bill today. It comes as the legislation cleared a key procedural hurdle after Republican leaders cut a series of deals with some of the holdouts in their own party. They are pushing the bill through in a way that does not require any Democratic votes, but with a very slim Republican majority, only 3 seats. They are dealing with requests and concerns from a number of their own members. Over the weekend, the vote to take up the bill only passed 51-49, with 2 Republican senators, Tom Tillis of North Carolina and Rand Paul of Kentucky, voting with the Democrats to block consideration of the measure. As the vote unfolded Saturday night, a group of Republican hardliners, including Senators Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, Mike Lee of Utah, Rick Scott of Florida, and Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, demanded that GOP leaders insert deep spending cuts into the bill in exchange for their support. So the issue for them is that there's just too much in the way of spending and tax cuts and not in the way of actual spending cuts. And what this means is that it will increase the national debt by trillions of dollars over the next few years. Vice President J.D. Vance on Capitol Hill Saturday night to help negotiate with Republicans who opposed the bill, changing measures to try to win over a number of Republicans known as fiscal hawks. Ultimately, most of the holdouts voted in favor. So, Moshe, we are talking Bravo TV level drama, but on C-SPAN.
Yeah, the real senators of Capitol Hill cutting deals left and right, Jill, and then we started to learn the details of them yesterday.
After the vote, Republicans released a 940-page version of the legislation just after midnight. It contained the key changes they made to win over skeptics within the GOP. Things like creating a $25 billion fund to help hospitals in rural communities that are expected to be really hit hard by the Medicaid cuts that the legislation calls for. There's also a faster phase out of tax credits for wind and solar projects, an increase in the cap on state and local tax or SALT deductions demanded by lawmakers in the House. And Moshe, we should note that these negotiations are still ongoing. The Senate in session overnight on Sunday night as well. So as we record this late Sunday night, it is possible that there might be some changes to the bill in the hours after we record.
Yeah, officially they went into 20 hours of debate. It's not clear whether they'll do the full 20 hours, which means sometime early morning Monday, they go into what they call in the Senate a vote-a-rama, where they just vote on. Listen, I don't make up these words, Jill. I just report them.
They make it sound a lot more fun than it actually is.
It's a vote-a-rama, where every senator who has changes to the bill, puts it up there, and then they vote for them. So as you listen to this early Monday morning, they might be engaged in a vote-a-rama. You can turn on C-SPAN, see what they're up to. Anyway, the point is, throughout the day today, we'll probably get a better sense of what else changes, whether the Senate's actually going to be able to vote on the legislation. They're hoping to do it late morning today, early afternoon, pass the legislation, then kick it back to the House since they made some changes here. And then the House has to figure out a way to pass it. Now, you mentioned, Jill, Medicaid, and that's been a key issue here. That is the government-funded healthcare program that serves tens of millions of Americans who have very low incomes. It's drawing a lot of concerns here. Now, according to new estimates from the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the legislation would mean that about 12 million more Americans would become uninsured over the course of the next few years here as they start to ratchet up requirements for Medicaid. That is a huge concern both for Democrats as well as some Republicans. We've heard from them in the Senate, and that's why you've seen some of these carve-outs that we'll talk about here for various senators who are like, whoa, this is really going to impact people on Medicaid in my state. So red states and blue states, Americans from both parties who vote both parties are on Medicaid. The key issue is if you're looking for cuts when it comes to what the government spends its money on, you look no further than Medicaid and Medicare in the trillions of dollars, as well as Social Security. That's basically half the budget for the federal government. So when they talk about all these other budget cuts, when Elon Musk and Doge were messing around with their budget cuts, you can, nip a couple billion here, a couple billion there. But when it comes to the $7 trillion we spend annually, the biggest chunk of it is in Medicaid and Medicare. And that's why Republicans have taken aim here. And so there are 2 key provisions when it comes to Medicaid in the legislation that has Democrats particularly concerned. One would establish a new strict national work requirement for some people on the Medicaid program. You would need to demonstrate that you've worked at least 80 hours in the month before they sign up or you qualify for an exemption. Now, the Senate version applies the provisions to the poor parents of children older than 14, in addition to childless adults without disabilities. And they believe that ratcheting up these requirements will lead people to not meet those requirements, thereby saving the federal government more than $300 billion over the next decade. Another provision related to Medicaid here that Republicans have put in here that they hope will be a big source of savings comes from new restrictions on a strategy that many states use to finance Medicaid by imposing taxes on medical providers to leverage a larger federal contribution. So the issue here is that many medical providers depend on Medicaid, the revenue from Medicaid, because Medicaid is much better than regular insurance companies in terms of refunding and paying for various procedures. And there's just a lot of concern here from Democrats, again, from some Republicans, about what this may mean for both medical providers as well as people on Medicaid. Take a listen here to Senator Murphy. He is a Democrat from Connecticut.
It's going to represent the biggest transfer of wealth and money from the poor and the middle class to the rich in the history of the country.
So you hear the Democrats there are basically framing this as this is a transfer of wealth from poor people to rich people, because the tax cuts, which apply to everyone, most benefit the rich. Now, the tax cuts, these are the tax cuts that they're extending here in this bill. They went into effect during the first Trump administration. They are set to expire this year. So this bill would make them permanent. Of course, if you look at the analysis, the people who benefit the most from the tax cuts are the people in the highest tax brackets. Hence why you hear Murphy and Democrats saying you're transferring wealth here. And you're hearing this from a lot of Democrats, Jill. When it comes to this piece of legislation, there are some Republicans who are very concerned about the way Democrats are going to be able to argue what this legislation does next year. And it could help Democrats win a majority in the House and Senate. They compare this to 2010 after Obamacare passed, how Republicans were able to argue against Democrats there and win back the House and Senate in that first midterm of the Obama administration. Nonetheless, you talked about some of the changes that were made over the weekend to try to win over some of the Republican holdouts. In particular, several of the senators who represent states with poor rural populations, we're talking Maine, Missouri, North Carolina, they want a provision for a $25 billion fund to support rural healthcare providers dealing with the Medicaid cuts here. You also had a carve out specifically, Jill, for Medicaid recipients in non-contiguous states. Non-contiguous meaning Alaska and Hawaii. Why did they specifically write that in the bill? Because Lisa Murkowski, a Republican from Alaska, said, I ain't supporting this. And so they said, okay, how about we say that these cuts apply to 48 states, but non-contiguous states do not apply. So specifically, they carved that out for her and then suddenly won her approval. That's something that we highlighted over on the premium feed over the weekend. But in particular, Jill, one of the fights happened with North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis, who, despite some of the changes made by Republican leaders, stood his ground and voted with Democrats.
So Senator Tillis said after the vote that he opposed the legislation because it would result in tens of billions of dollars in lost funding for North Carolina, including, quote, our hospitals and rural communities. President Trump attacked Tillis on social media, saying that he would support a Republican to run against him in next year's primary. And then on Sunday, Tillis announced he's not going to seek re-election in 2026.
Yeah, it sort of whiplash there. Though Tillis was debating this, he was going to have a difficult fight nonetheless, but it became all the more difficult when the leader of his own party was like, yeah, I'm going to try to kick him out because he's not supporting my legislation. Tillis admitting that he wasn't looking forward to this in general, even before facing the wrath of Trump here. And then he put up this really interesting statement that we put out on the premium feed over the weekend. Tillis writing, too many elected officials are motivated by pure raw politics who really don't give a damn about the people they promise to represent on the campaign trail. He says that by now promising to leave office in the next year and a half, this gives him the freedom to vote as he wishes. He doesn't have to try to accommodate the White House or anybody else in his party, but vote truly in the way that he thinks best represents North Carolina voters. He said that effectively the debate for him, Joe, was spending the next 6 years navigating what he called political theater and partisan gridlock, or spending time with the love of his life, his wife, Susan, their 2 children, 3 beautiful grandchildren, and extended family. So he has opted for the second one.
Feels like the right choice, feels like the right life choice.
All these guys, we've seen so many members in the last few years. You saw almost an identical statement from Mitt Romney a couple of years ago when he decided to leave the Senate, being like, I can't get anything done. And the way politics works these days is I got to do whatever best for the party and best for, specifically if the president is a member of my party, and not for what I think is good for voters. And so you see a lot of people who had, great intentions going in there decide, to hang it up sooner than they thought.
Right. You understand why, as a person, that is the right decision for him. But as a country, we are losing a lot of the moderate voices because there's simply no room for them in the parties anymore. Both sides, by the way.
Yeah, and he makes a point, by the way. The Tillis statement made mention, effectively, of Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, two Democrats who didn't win many points with their own party for crossing party lines and voting with Republicans sometimes. And he's like, it's not working on either side. Republicans love Democrats who cross the line and vote with them, but hate Republicans who cross the line and vote with Democrats. And same thing for Democrats. They love to see Republicans who are willing to buck their own party, but then when it's their own party voting with Republicans, not so happy about it. And he's like, you're losing all these moderates, you're losing people willing to compromise, and it's leading to nothing getting done.
So his departure will set off a highly competitive race in North Carolina that could be pivotal in the battle for control of the closely divided Senate next year. It is the latest congressional retirement to underscore the rightward shift of the GOP and the reality, again, that there's just little room for any Republican to break with Trump. Tillis played a key role in some major bipartisan legislation in recent years, like a compromise bill intended to stop dangerous people from accessing firearms that former President Biden had signed into law in 2022. He was also part of a bipartisan group of senators who worked to propose changes to how Congress counted electoral votes after January 6, 2021. But back to the big, beautiful bill. On Sunday, the Senate parliamentarian, who is essentially the referee of the Senate, you could say, found some issues with parts of how the nearly 1,000-page bill is written. The parliamentarian also identified problems with several provisions that would increase paperwork requirements for people enrolling in Medicaid, and the repeal of a regulation that would require a minimum staffing ratio in nursing homes paid by Medicaid, among other provisions in the Senate bill. Sharp cuts to subsidies for wind and solar power. That is something that President Trump had called for last week. These changes are causing friction with Republicans who have publicly supported green energy credits, as they have been popular in red states and blue states. But Trump very much opposed to anything clean energy.
Yeah, he doesn't want the government to spend a dime on it. In fact, he only wants incentives for like coal and oil. And one of the people, Jill, not surprising, we're hearing from again on that is Elon Musk, his old buddy, chimed back in on X over the weekend, calling the bill utterly insane and destructive, in particular around these energy tax credits. The Senate measure also will more quickly end tax credits for EVs. And you saw the White House is really clamping down here on the handful of Republicans willing to buck them. Over the weekend, Trump spent part of his day golfing with Rand Paul and Ron Johnson, who, it didn't matter for Rand. Rand still voted against Trump, but Ron Johnson flipped in one of those made for Bravo C-SPAN moments late on Saturday night. I don't know if any of you were that nerdy political nerds that you were watching C-SPAN late on Saturday night.
Just you, Moshe.
I was just monitoring it on X, Joe. I didn't even have C-SPAN on. I had the C-SPAN Twitter feed open though. Anyway, again, we should reiterate as you listen to this debate continues in the Senate, and there'll be a vote at some point today. That's their goal. And then the big question, Joel, is whatever they pass kicks back over to the House. And that's where Speaker Johnson, who narrowly passed his version of the bill the first time, 215 to 214 by one vote, now gets a new version of the bill that he has to convince his members to support. Again, Trump has given them a July 4th deadline. That leaves a couple days here. They all want to go on vacation. How will he get the House Republicans in line here? There's many more of them than there are senators. There's 218 or so of those Republicans. And so will they be able to do it is one of the big questions. And then, Jill, the biggest thing that we'll discover in the coming weeks, what was in this bill, this 1,000-page bill? We're discovering all these various provisions, and at the last second, they're making a lot of changes here. And so we'll see what it took to potentially get this thing across the finish line and what was thrown in there.
All right, staying in Washington, D.C., Friday was the final opinion day of the Supreme Court's term, and it featured some major rulings on everything from executive power to parental rights and pornography protections for minors, and set up a critical month for the future of birthright citizenship in the United States. So in a 6-3 ruling, the Supreme Court decided that individual federal judges can no longer issue nationwide injunctions. So those are decisions by judges that have blocked a president's policy from taking effect across the entire country. We have seen an increasing number in recent years over several presidents, including a record amount, several dozen in just the first few months of President Trump's second term. This specific case centered on Trump's controversial executive order signed in January, which would have denied U.S. citizenship to the children of unauthorized immigrants and foreigners on temporary work, student, and tourist visas. Some studies estimate that the population accounts for more than 150,000 babies born in the U.S. every year. Lower courts had blocked the order from taking effect nationwide. So the justices did not rule on whether ending birthright citizenship is constitutional. That question is still being weighed by lower courts and will likely make its way back up to the Supreme Court. But again, what the decision does do is restricts judges from blocking the executive order and others nationwide. So as far as the birthright citizenship order, it's still on pause for another 30 days based on the Supreme Court ruling, which is meant to allow lower courts to reevaluate their nationwide injunctions and then tailor their prior injunctions or blocks of the White House policy to apply only to the actual parties involved instead of these blanket bans.
Yeah, this has been a frustration for Trump. This was a frustration for Biden with his student loan executive order. Other presidents have complained about this, but Trump actually decided to file a case related to this. He has filed a number of executive orders, but ultimately decided to test the executive order injunction issue here. And the at issue here is just, how much power judges have. And what's interesting is you have the Supreme Court effectively ruling, limiting the authority of lower court judges, giving more authority here to the executive. They say there are other ways you could seek a pause in an executive order if you have an issue with it, but judges shouldn't be able to just declare the executive order moot for the entire country and pause it for the entire country. And that's something that we have been seeing time and time again, especially in these last few months, as judges are just like, halt the entire presidential policy for the entire country as we figure this out. The Supreme Court saying here, no, you can be specific to the people suing or the states where this is happening, but you can't just kind of wave a wand and pursue this injunction for the whole country. So what does this mean here for the birthright citizenship order? We're going to see, not surprisingly, you already saw immigration organizations rushing to court on Friday to file class action lawsuits, because that's something the Supreme Court majority in their decision effectively mentioned. They're like, you can still do class actions. That's the way to do this. So this next month is going to be pivotal. The Supreme Court saying, while you guys all figure out your injunction rulings, in the meantime, we do believe this executive order needs to be paused for the next 30 days as you figure this all out. So what does this mean moving forward on July 27th? Unclear. But the legal experts I spoke to over the weekend, Jill, do not believe this birthright citizenship order is going to go into effect. And just for background here, since we haven't talked about it in a while, birthright citizenship is the policy we have in the U.S., other countries have, that says effectively, if you're born here, you're a citizen, regardless of whether your parent is a citizen or your parent is here on vacation or here on a worker visa or here undocumented. Now, that has been backed up over the course of more than a century by the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Now, Trump and his team have taken issue with the 14th Amendment, saying that wasn't the intention of the 14th Amendment. What was the 14th Amendment? It was passed in the aftermath of the Civil War to ensure that all Black slaves from the South and their children were granted citizenship, because there was a time in this country when if you were a Black slave, you were not deemed a citizen of this country. Now, the issue the Trump administration has is like, well, that was the intention of the 14th Amendment. We do not believe the intention was to allow someone on vacation here or on a worker visa or student visa here to have a child and have their children also be a citizen. Now, again, folks are skeptical, even some conservative legal experts, that this can be done via executive order, that ultimately you have to either amend the Constitution or pass legislation by Congress to ensure that you change birthright citizenship. But in the meantime, we had this ruling related to injunctions. And what this means, let's put birthright citizenship aside for a second, is just more power that President Trump will have and future presidents will have over what they can do when it comes to executive orders. and what can be done and what cannot be done by courts to stop them.
Also on Friday, the Supreme Court ruled that a Texas law requiring age verification to access porn sites is constitutional and does not infringe on adults' First Amendment rights.
Yeah, this case was key because it could impact similar laws in about 20 states. It comes as lawmakers are working to regulate content that children consume online. Under the law, users must submit a government ID or other verification methods like facial scans to prove they're 18 or older. Now, I should mention, Jill, the three liberals dissented on this, not because they believed children should have access to pornography, but because they felt the verification methods in the Texas law infringed on privacy.
The Supreme Court also ruled 6-3 Friday along ideological lines in favor of a group of Maryland parents who want the ability to opt out of having their children read books in school that have LGBTQ themes. The Coalition of Parents in Mahmoud versus Taylor opposed the mandatory teaching of books in the elementary school curriculum at Maryland's Montgomery County Public Schools that feature gay and transgender characters without being notified by the school.
Yeah, the parents said they didn't seek to have the books removed from school libraries or classrooms or even not used in the lessons, but they wanted the ability to know in advance if these books were being read to their kids so they could have their kids opt out of those lessons. The complaint said that some of these books promoted what they called one-sided transgender ideology or encouraged gender transitioning. And the coalition of parents here were Muslims, Catholics, Orthodox Christians who made this argument. So this was a religious freedom argument.
All right, time for the speed read from the New York Times. Some new data shows arrests of undocumented migrants have increased nationwide and more than doubled in 38 states since President Trump took office in January. Most of the arrests have occurred in states with large migrant populations, including Florida and Texas, which also saw relatively high immigration enforcement under President Biden. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has arrested more than 20,000 people in Texas since Trump's second term started. Even as border crossings have slowed significantly, the agency's Miami field office, which covers both Florida and Puerto Rico, has arrested more than 11,000 people. Other states with large immigrant populations like New Jersey and New York have seen relatively modest increases compared with the previous administration. Some of the sharpest increases in arrests have come in states across the South and the West that are friendly to Trump's immigration policies. Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, and West Virginia have seen the fastest increase in ICE enforcement relative to the size of their immigrant populations. ICE has arrested more than 4,000 people in those states combined, compared with around 2,500 in the same span in 2024.
So the rate now has doubled in Trump's second term from about 300 arrests per day towards the end of Biden to now more than 660 immigration arrests per day. Back in May, we told you about this. Stephen Miller, sort of the architect of Trump's strategy here, set a goal of 3,000 arrests per day. And he was allegedly saying, according to some conservative media outlets, go to Home Depot parking lots, go wherever you got to go to arrest folks. ICE until then was really focused on just folks with a criminal history here in the U.S., saying that, it wasn't their priority to arrest other undocumented folks who were, potentially abiding by the law or had jobs here, even though they had overstayed a visa or come in to the country not through a legal pathway. Miller said, forget it, do them all. And so we have seen the ratcheting up of tensions, particularly in LA, regarding that. But the numbers are interesting, Jill, because they do show that ultimately ICE is limited in terms of what it can do. And so it's really just focused primarily in these areas where they have cooperation from local law enforcement. But I will say one thing, Jill, if Zoran Mamdani becomes the next mayor of New York, look for a full-on immigration fight in New York City between ICE and the new mayor, because remember, the mayor has made one of his priorities, as opposed to the current mayor who cooperates with ICE, that Zoran will not have the NYPD cooperate with the feds. And so it could really make New York central to that fight in 2026.
All right, let's head overseas from ABC News. 3 Iranian men executed on alleged charges of collaborating with Israel. This is according to officials with the Islamic regime in Iran, and that brings the total number of people put to death on similar charges during the 12-day war between Iran and Israel to 6. Iran's judiciary said that the men were convicted of espionage on behalf of Israel's Mossad intelligence agency. Human rights activists claim the men were Kurdish day laborers with no access to classified information and were denied fair trials, as is typical in Iran. The news of these executions come as Iranians are reporting a crackdown on dissent, and of course it follows this war where Israeli intelligence effectively infiltrated Iranian military leadership, nuclear scientists, assassinating dozens of them and destroying key sites around the country throughout the war. The Iranian intelligence and security forces say they arrested more than 700 people accused of having ties to Israel. Israeli officials have not commented on those arrested for alleged ties to Israel, but Mossad chief David Barnea said the Israeli intelligence agency would continue to keep a, quote, close eye on Iran.
Yeah, it's not clear how many of the 700 actually have a connection to Israel, or is just the Iranian regime trying to make a show for its people that they're getting to the bottom of this. They're figuring out who helped the Israelis create this hugely embarrassing situation for the Iranian regime that led to many of their top nuclear scientists, many of their top generals all getting assassinated, included the Israelis apparently setting up a drone base, building and setting up a drone base inside of Iran that they operated for several years. They were so wired into the Iranian regime that the Israelis were able to place text messages to a number of key military leaders, get them to all meet together in a bunker. And that's when Israel began its war and blew them all up in that bunker. In fact, the Iranians had a huge funeral over the weekend paying tribute to a number of the military leaders and nuclear scientists who were assassinated during the war. Remember, there have been numerous examples over the years, including last year when the Israelis successfully assassinated a Hamas leader who was staying in a secure Iranian government building in Tehran after the day that he met with the Ayatollah. So huge fiasco for the Iranian regime, and that has meant that they're looking around for culprits. They're looking for people they can blame, even if they had no connection to Israel here. In particular, Jill Yashar Ali, a journalist who closely covers Iran, has been talking about how the Baha'i people, Baha'i is a minority faith inside Iran, a number of them are being targeted by the regime right now. And so it appears the Islamic regime is very much using the aftermath of this war to go after various minority groups inside of Iran, because remember, it's majority Persian, but there's a whole bunch of groups, Kurds, Baha'i, a very small group of Jews who still live inside Iran, Azeris, a whole number of minority groups who have been persecuted through the years in Iran. There's a lot of concern, especially given that the regime is trying to consolidate power after this embarrassment and trying to ensure there's not an uprising in Iran, that they're going to use this time period to really crack down further on rights, arresting a number of people, putting them in prison on no charges. That's something the Islamic regime has been doing since it was founded back in 1979.
From the New York Times, the president of the University of Virginia has resigned following pressure from the Trump administration to step aside amid a Justice Department investigation into the school's diversity practices. The Justice Department had demanded that the university president, James Ryan, step down to resolve an investigation over the school's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. The university's governing board of visitors voted in March to end its DEI office under the Trump administration's order that U.S. schools end diversity programs or risk losing federal funding. But the Justice Department accused the school of failing to dismantle DEI and sent a letter dated June 17th warning that it needed to act fast. University leaders had concerns that the Trump administration would strip the school of hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding. Ryan decided to resign, and in a letter to the university community on Friday, he wrote, quote, "I cannot make a unilateral decision to fight the federal government in order to save my own job. To do so not only would be quixotic, but appear selfish and self-centered to the hundreds of employees who would lose their jobs, the researchers who would lose their funding, and the hundreds of students who could lose financial aid or have their visas withheld."
Not surprisingly, Jill, the two senators from the state, Mark Warner and Tim Kaine, both Democrats, said in a joint statement that this was outrageous, that the Trump administration is demanding the firing or departure of a university president. This is viewed as a victory inside the White House as it looks to pressure higher education to fall in line with the views of President Trump here, in particular when it comes to DEI. We've been following the Harvard case, the Columbia case, but UVA, they're pursuing this around the country. And Ryan's resignation does present challenges for other colleges negotiating here. that ultimately they see blood in the water. They see they were able to push one president out. So what does that mean for these other fights? Notably, Ryan actually was previously at Harvard, where he was known for pushing and being a part of their diversity efforts. And that was one thing he said at UVA, is that he wanted to make the university both great and good. Great for the students, but good for the world. And so one of the things he was pushing was first-generation students. And UVA has actually been considered now a top 5 public university for a number of years. They've done incredibly well. In fact, he's only the 9th president to lead the university since the position was first created back in 1905. And he was actually unanimously supported by the board to continue in the role just a couple of years ago.
All right, from Axios, kids and teens consumed fewer calories from fast food over the decade that ended in 2023, according to data from the CDC's National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. Kids ages 2 through 19 consumed an average of 11% of their daily calories from fast food on a given day between August 2021 and August 2023, which is down from an average of nearly 14% in 2013. About 30% of youth ages 2 through 19 ate fast food on any given day between August 2021 and 2023, down from 36% between 2015 and 2018, according to the CDC. For adults 20 and up, average calories from fast food fell from about 14% in 2013 to 11.7% during mid-2021 to mid-2023.
So these stats obviously predate the current Trump administration, predate Maha, predate RFK. So I was just joking at the top that, people are changing their answers. Ultimately here, you do see this movement towards healthier eating over the course of the last decade. In fact, a previous White House might take credit for it, Jill. There was a first lady named Michelle Obama who very much pushed healthy eating among younger people more than a decade ago. And she actually got a bunch of grief from it from the right. This is where we're at already going into the Trump administration, but it does reinforce probably one of the reasons why RFK was so popular, why Maha has become increasingly popular, and why you start to see a lot of these corporations fall in line here. We talked last week about Nestle and some other companies falling in line when it comes to artificial dyes, added sugars. Seed oils have been one of the things they've been focusing on as well. So sign of the times here. Kids these days eating slightly less fast food.
And finally, from The Guardian, top-ranked women's tennis stars, American Coco Gauff and Belarus's Aryna Sabalenka, took to center court at Wimbledon ahead of the tournament start today to shake off some tension that has been building between the pair since the French Open. The pair danced the 90s hit, Everybody Dance Now. They did not do the Running Man, in case you're wondering.
That's for the next TikTok video.
So the pair shared the video to their followers on TikTok and Instagram with the caption, TikTok dances always had a way of bringing people together. At the French Open earlier this month, Gauff beat Sabalenka in 3 sets to win the major, becoming the first American woman since Serena Williams in 2015 to do so. Following Gauff's win, Sabalenka sparked backlash by saying that Gauff won not because she played incredibly, but because Sabalenka had made mistakes. She later called her remarks, quote, completely unprofessional, admitting that they were driven by emotion, and then apologized both publicly and privately to Gauff. Gauff responding graciously, acknowledging Sabalenka's apology, saying, quote, I don't think I was playing well either, so I understood where she was coming from with that.
So we're going to watch a potential rematch here between Gauff and Sabalenka, depending on how well they do here at Wimbledon, which again opens up today. The women's final is actually scheduled for July 12th. So there's a lot of tennis to be played between now and then, but we'll be watching. I know you'll be watching, Jill.
I will, Moshe, and I always like seeing good sportsmanship.
All right, now time for On This Day in History. On this day in 1905, June 30th, 1905, Albert Einstein publishes On the Electrodynamics of Moving Bodies, a paper that sets out his theory of special relativity. It is in the German physics journal at the time. Jill, 1905, historians have referred to as the miracle year for Einstein. He wrote 5 papers that year that would effectively revolutionize 20th century scientific thought. Now, this particular paper that came out on this day, well, you might have heard of the equation E equals mc squared. That's his theory of special relativity. In basic terms, what did he determine? That time and space are not fixed. They depend on how fast you're moving. So if we're both watching a train, you're on the train, I'm outside the train, and then lightning strikes, it strikes, and the light that we see from it is going to be slightly different based on where we're standing, because, if the person on the train is moving, they're going to be seeing it at, it's slightly millisecond different. So that, in effect, here is a bit of the theory of special relativity, E equals mc squared. If you move really fast, time slows down for you compared to someone standing still. So what impact did this have? Well, nuclear weapons, but also things like GPS satellites. They deal with time being slightly different in space than here on Earth. And so Albert Einstein, midway through his miracle year here, Jill, with a theory that would change the world. Did that clear it up for you a little more? Can you explain it to someone else now?
I get the train. I get what you're saying.
You get
I
it.
don't think
You get
I
it.
could explain it well, but I hear you. So
Space
thank you
and
for
time
that.
not fixed. They depend on where you're at and how fast you're moving. All right. On this day in 1906, the following year, President Teddy Roosevelt signed into law the Meat Inspection Act and Pure Food and Drug Act. Both were in response to Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. This was required reading for me in high school. I remember The Jungle, which exposed unsanitary practices in the meatpacking industry. On this day in 1936, Margaret Mitchell published Gone with the Wind, the romance that would then go on to win a Pulitzer Prize and be adapted into a film. On this day in 2019, while meeting at the DMZ, President Trump crosses into North Korea to meet Kim Jong-un, becoming the first sitting U.S. president to visit the country. And we end here with a bit of movie history. On this day in 1971, 54 years ago today, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, starring Gene Wilder, premiered in theaters. Of course, we have a new version now with Timothée Chalamet, Jill, but the Gene Wilder version always does it for me.
Agreed.
Yeah. And off the Anna Wintour news we gave you on Friday, it actually turns out that on this day in history, 19 years ago, Devil Wears Prada opened in theaters. Devil Wears Prada, now officially 19 years old.
All right, everybody. That is a wrap on this Monday. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
See you guys tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.